Hello, I'm Dawn Durham.
And I'm Dr. Nicole Holland-Sims.
Welcome to PaTTAnpod. There's certainly a need to talk about the social-emotional learning of our students. We're hearing a lot about this topic lately, rightfully so. The question remains, how do we handle social-emotional learning and academics and behavior? We have to determine what these systems look like woven together versus in isolation. Dr. George Batsche is here with us today to guide our thinking in the need for integrating academics, behavior, and social-emotional learning. Thanks, George, for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dawn. I'm glad to be here.
I want to think about, when we think about a perfect world, in the way we think of social-emotional learning, behavior, and academics, in a perfect setting, what does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like?
Well, at a school level, social-emotional learning, behavior, and academics are integrated when there's a common language, common understanding that every academic task, in other words, the skills that the kid has to do the task, and the behaviors necessary to engage that task. For example, staying on task, asking questions if you are struggling with something, and the social-emotional skills to manage that task. Every one of those comes into play for every activity. So let me give you an example. You may have a student who comes in and had a rough morning. This student is perfectly capable of doing the tasks asked of him or her. The student has the skills to engage that task, starts a task quickly or what have you. But that morning, that student is concerned about something. That student may be anxious. The student could be angry. The student might be fearful that this task is going to be used to judge her or him about their skills. For example, when they take a test. Well, they may have the skills. They may know how to engage the task. But when there's a social-emotional interference, that trumps the other two. So a student can look like they don't have the skills, that they don't have the behaviors because of that social-emotional interference. That said, a student who maybe has marginal academic skills knows how to start a task, ask questions, but who really is emotionally desirous and committed to doing well, is happy, feeling good about engaging that task, that student actually might outperform the teacher expectations. So the idea that when we give the student an academic task, that if they have the skills they should do it, is really not accurate. Sometimes students don't know how to start a task. Teachers are concerned that once they get started, they're fine, but I have to go over there because after 5 minutes, nothing has happened. Or if a student, many teachers think students are moody on a particular day. That moodiness reflects feelings and thoughts that interfere with the ability to do that. So in a school, the school-based leadership team, whether that's the principal, team members, grade level or subject area leaders, teacher leaders, if there's a common language, common understanding, that every time we lesson plan, we have to think about not only what learning goal we want the students to meet, how they're going to demonstrate those skills, but what are the behavioral engagement tasks? If it's an independent, do-it-your-seat, you're basically engaging with yourself to do this. But what if you're in a center or a group activity? Now those behaviors have to include listening to others, sharing, not talking too much, not being distracted. So in a group setting, the behaviors to complete the academic task are more complex. And then finally, for some kids, and I'll just use an example, who may not be particularly at grade level on a task. Every time the teacher puts down something for that student to do or assigns the student to a group, that student starts having emotional reaction. I can't do this. I'm going to be embarrassed. Everybody's going to think I'm stupid. When anxiety levels go up, for example, as one of the social emotional areas to manage, adults and children, their capacity to make good decisions goes down. So that helping that student manage anxiety, self-awareness, when I'm getting anxious? What do I do to help myself be less anxious? And for some students, that they may have some skills to do that. Close your eyes, take a breath, I can do this. In other cases, teachers might have to help students manage that anxiety. In general, one thing for everyone to remember is regardless of a student's level of performance, whenever the task that is asked of that student, the demands of that task, are higher than the student's capacity to do the task, social emotional issues come into play and have to be recognized. So when teachers are planning and they know there's a group of students that this is going to be a difficult task for, that should be the trigger for, I expect these students are going to have some social emotional issues around this. How can we plan for that ahead of time so that that serves as a positive and not a negative?
So it's really that understanding that every academic task already has a behavior component built into it by nature and a social emotional learning piece built into it by nature, because that's what our students are doing. And having that common understanding of those are all already present, we can't isolate them because our students are not isolating them.
It's not just students.
And adults.
It's adults. If you go for a driver's test, you may have the skills to drive the car. You may even have the behaviors to stay focused on the road. But if you're distracted by something that is affective, cognitive affective, social emotional stuff, you're likely to do very poorly. So adults and students say, I don't do well with tests. What they're saying is that the social emotional aspects of that are interfering with my capacity to demonstrate what I know.
So it's what's interfering with my ability to show you I can do this task, whether it be a child or an adult.
Exactly.
So as we think about what you just described, how adults have to take an understanding of that integration of both academics, behavior, and social emotional learning, how do adults do that in the classroom? You gave great examples already, but how do they really think about that when they're interacting with the students in their rooms?
Nicole, it's really a good question, and I may be over focusing or simplifying this.
Okay.
But classrooms are places where there are teachers and kids. Sometimes there's other people there helping to support that teacher. But the reality is those moment-to-moment interactions, whether they are redirecting a student, whether they're helping scaffold an academic task for students, getting a student back on task, that is teacher skill level. Now, the cool thing is that some teachers will say, I have no idea how to manage a student's anxiety over doing math.
Right.
Well, I've been a building principal, a district administrator, I'm trained as a psychologist, I've spent years in classrooms. Virtually all the time that a teacher says, I don't know how to manage that student's anxiety, I'm thinking, I watch you do this all the time.
Interesting.
But now that it's focused on one particular student, so there are strategies. Things like pre-correction, ensuring that a student is pre-taught something so that when they actually have to do it, it's the second time they're doing it and they're not anxious because they already have background knowledge and they can do this, okay? So teachers pre-teach all the time. That is a social emotional learning skill strategy for teachers. A huge one is the ratio of positives to corrective feedback. And I'm not going to say negatives because teachers generally are not negative with kids. But if you give corrective feedback, if I give corrective feedback to you about something, you know, the next time you do a podcast like this, you should consider, you may not feel really good about that as opposed to if I said, you're the most amazing podcaster I've ever met. Okay?
Exactly.
So even giving corrective feedback is going to trigger some potential social emotional reaction. So there are a number of skills: pre-correction, 3-to-1 positives to negatives, active supervision. And active supervision is reminding students of strategies that will be successful. So if we have something where there's a comprehension skill for something that is read to the student, the teacher might say, remember these easy steps. Don't forget to So those kinds of things, and some kids need that. The other kid's not even listening because they're like, I got this, I know how to do this.
Right.
But for some kids, those prompts, remember, that's active supervision, as opposed to reactive supervision, or having to do consequences for kids for being off task, because that absolutely will trigger social emotional issues. For the reason that attendance problems in school tend to have less dramatic impact on some academic areas than kids sent to the office. When a student is sent to the office, we're saying, we don't want you here. Your behavior isn't good enough to be here. That's just full of social emotional stuff. Coming back to the classroom, imagine after you were forcibly removed, even if you left under your own power, all the kids look at you when you go back. The teacher, you're wondering, does he or she like me? Are they still mad at me? All of that wells up and interferes with the student's capacity to do that work. So some approaches to social emotional learning are direct teaching programs, teaching students how to self-control, self-awareness, social awareness. But the work of this happens with adult-student interactions, every interaction throughout the day in school. And for school climate to change, there has to be a commitment by all of the adults around this awareness that every interaction I have with a student may involve a skill. It may involve behaviors that the student has. But there's also going to be this emotional, affective component to the cognitive activity. And just that awareness is a great start to improving student outcomes by ensuring that it's not just about the academic task. It's about engagement and students being able to manage the social emotional component. And as adults, if they can't manage, just like the task, how do we scaffold that for us? Teachers are awesome at scaffolding. They just need to apply that to the social emotional and the behavior as well. Teachers have the capacity to do this better than anyone else because teachers do have parenting skills. They have teaching skills.
Right.
They have cat herding skills. And in difficult situations where students may have issues with trauma in their life. They may come from an environment where they're exposed to things that many kids are not, and they bring that to school with them emotionally. We're just in this initiative with integrating academics, behavior, and social emotional within a multi-tiered system of supports. We're becoming more purposeful about it, and not just hoping that teachers come because they're outstanding individuals with these skills. That's not fair to teachers, and it's not fair to the kids. We need to support the teachers to be able to support the kids.
That's awesome. So as you're thinking about school systems and the teams that exist in those systems, for instance, in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of schools that are implementing PBIS as well as MTSS academic. And a lot of times they silo each other. So it's the MTSS academic team, the PBIS team, and then maybe the counselor and psychologist do the SEL component. What suggestions do you have around integrating some of those teams or aligning some of those team structures?
So, Nicole, you have a great question, and as educators, silos are awesome for farmers.
But not
They
so
are
much
not
us.
so good in schools.
Right.
And so, if we put things in silos, we underestimate the complexity of children and youth. If a Title I teacher is working with a small group of students, and these students are not responding equally to instruction, they came in at kind of at the same skill level. The teacher is doing some evidence-based practices. That should be a trigger to look at behavioral and social emotional issues for students that are not doing as well. So maybe we do some staff in silos. These are the student services staff.
Right.
These are the general education. These are special education. When it comes to working with teachers, the adults have to get their act together and have a seamless sense of services so that the students perceive this as integrated and seamless. So we wouldn't have a school psychologist saying, well, academics is not my responsibility.
You better
You know
not.
what? the cognitive skills that kids have and bring to math, for example, could be issues with the learning. For a teacher to say, the mental health issues of kids scare me, I don't know what to do about that. In schools, the good news about schools is we're only in school 350 minutes a day. We're not managing students' entire lives. So PBIS brings to this equation students' capacity to predict their environments. We have a few rules. Be safe, be respectful. They can predict what will happen when they do that and what won't. In other words, the environment is predictable and consistent. That is the best gift we can give our kids.
Predictable
Not
and
just in
consistent.
school, but also
Right.
at home, by the way. Parents who have predictable environments and are consistent, their children have way fewer behavioral issues and what have you. So PBIS brings this solid foundation of having kids not have to be anxious because they don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
The same thing is true with the academic day. If we keep switching up every day, oh, we're going to do this today, but you know what? Today we're not. We're going to student if they can predict their environment. So that's classroom structure. And so that's what PBIS brings to the table. Teachers build on that structure and add academics. Social emotional issues are very closely tied to some of the PBIS tenets.
Right.
I think PBIS and PBIS people, don't get upset with me, really their first priority is ensuring that the structure of the organization, the predictability, the positiveness, what have you. But when students come with social emotional issues, for example, around trauma, anxiety, it seems like our society, everybody's becoming more
Ridden
anxious.
with
Our
it, yeah.
environments
True,
are not
yes.
as safe.
It's
Things are
true.
not as predictable. And we have to recognize that anxiety has to be addressed. So whether you're a psychologist, a custodian, principal, you're a teacher, and a kid is in distress, instead of trying to fix it, say, tell me how you're feeling. You look really worried. You look angry. You look afraid. Address the social, if the social emotional issue is what is trumping the problem, then address it first. Don't hope to get lucky with it by focusing on what you're comfortable with. Does that make sense?
Yes,
does.
yes. And I've heard you say numerous times, hope is not a strategy.
It's not.
So,
Yeah.
you
But
know, we
hope
can't
is
rest
an
in that.
environment in which strategies can be developed.
All right.
But hope sometimes takes longer time than you have.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I think that's key, that seamless alignment of services. In order to create a predictable, consistent environment for our students. And as you had said, it is key, and I think that's for students and adults, is that predictable, consistent environment and that seamless effort. We just can't, we can't emphasize that enough.
we can't have kids getting different messages from different adults they interact with every day.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's the issue. So it requires leadership. And I was a building principal for many, many years. I underestimated at first the power of that leadership and the gift you have to be able to bring a group of people together, very different people with different priorities and different anxieties and different behaviors, and come as a team so that when the kids are involved, those students have no doubt about what kind of environment they're in, that they can turn to multiple people for help, and that they will get the same kinds of opportunities to strengthen their skills regardless of who they interact with. So if you're organized in silos, I don't prefer that. Having an academic team and a behavior team comes to be really, and then the social emotional is the counselor who's supposed to deal with that when
Right.
when the academics didn't work and we couldn't manage the behavior, ship them to the counselor. That's not fair to teachers, counselors, and behavior specialists. We have to have these courageous conversations about how do we want this building to support, interact, guide, correct students. And we're all on the same page. And sometimes that takes more time than either districts allocate or that we estimate.
But it's crucial time. It's,
Well, you'll
it's
know
critical.
because the students won't be doing as well as you want them to do.
Exactly.
And we better amp up the time that the adults use to get their acts together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your insight on this, because understanding that silos are very common in education.
Right.
And as you had said, that's great on a farm, but not necessarily in the classroom, in the school building. So we really need to work on that system. And this kind of leads me into the question. We ask this of all of our PaTTAnpod guests. We want to inspire others to grow. We want them to think through and reflect on, where might I need some refinement? Where might I need some assistance to grow professionally, educationally, my own personal ability to be here in the classroom? What advice might you offer to those in the field in regards to helping them grow?
I think educators, and that includes everybody I've mentioned so far, educators can grow if they're in an environment that values it, provides the time, and nurtures it. So when you first started to ask the question, I thought I'd answer it one way. Now I'm going to answer it a different way.
Okay.
And you talk about silos. Silos in schools reflect silos in district offices.
Wow.
So if a special education director is in a portable away from the chief academic officer who's responsible for curriculum, and you can only use certain dollars for certain silos, if we know that that is not helpful to kids, and we do know it and we have the evidence for it, if we know if we did it this way, it was not helpful for kids, would leadership say, this is ridiculous? We're chasing money into silos, or organizationally we've been that way for years. Everybody's comfortable in their silo. And all that may be good for the adults, but we're not happy with our student data. And my moral imperative when I walk into a building, every day I ask people two questions. Are you happy with your data? And is every classroom one in which you would put your own flesh and blood?
That's right.
And if the answer to either of those questions is no, we have work to do. We also know that a system that produces the same outcomes for students 3 years in a row is perfectly aligned to continue to produce those outcomes. If you don't like the outcomes, change the system. And it takes committed, self-confident leaders at every level, classroom leaders, all the way to the superintendent and the Board of Education, to make a decision that what we have been doing is not wrong, it's just not working anymore. And we entrust the future to those school boards, superintendents, and principals. And if we know, if we can predict the outcomes that we're not happy with 3 years in the future, then our goal as leaders is to end the predictability. And that takes courageous conversations throughout the entire range. And it's interesting, because I do this work all the time. It seems as if organizationally silos are valued. I have yet to talk to people in the silo who are happy being there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's something that
Profound.
if you're not happy with the outcomes, change the system.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Change the system.
And if you don't want to be in the silo, and you keep saying, I've done many things like I do for you folks, and I've had people say, the wrong people are here. You're preaching to the choir. The choir should be everybody.
That's right.
We should never have the wrong people here. And that requires committed leadership, confidence, and the moral imperative that every classroom is one where I would put my own flesh and blood in this district.
I think that's a key question for all of us to reflect on and think about moving
Absolutely.
forward. Every practitioner who's listening to this, and everyone out there should be thinking, do I want my own flesh and blood in this classroom? And that really determines where are we moving from here. So I think that's great
Hits
insight.
home.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much for being with us on
Yes.
PaTTAnpod.
Thank
You know,
you
your
for
insight is
asking.
just so
This is-
crucial for us in understanding and being able to move forward and to change the outcomes if we're not happy with them, and to look at those outcomes and change our system.
Well, the work that PaTTAN does is phenomenal. This is an example, how you can reach out to educators, non-educators. It's my understanding that you reach out beyond Pennsylvania, other parts of the
do,
world.
yes.
So you are certainly doing your part to try to eliminate these silos.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate that. Well, Nicole and I
Means a
will accept
lot.
that
Yes.
compliment on behalf of all of the entire state system of PaTTAN. So thank you so much for
And
that.
thank
We
you for
appreciate it.
asking me.
Thank you to all of you in the field. You inspire educational growth in your students every day. A special thank you to John Ragsdale for producing this podcast. We'll see you next time on PaTTANpod.